being natural is simply a pose, and being natural is simply a pose, and the most irritating pose I know."
cried Lord Henry, laughing, and the two young men went out into the garden together, and ensconced themselves on a long bamboo seat that stood in the shade of a tall laurel bush. The sunlight slipped over the polished leaves. In the grass white daisies were tremulous. After a pause, Lord Henry pulled out his watch.
"I'm afraid I must be going, Basil,"
he murmured.
"and before I go I insist on your answering a question I put to you some time ago."
"What is that?"
said the painter, keeping his eyes fixed on the ground.
"You know quite well."
"I do not, Harry."
"Well, I will tell you what it is. I want you to explain to me why you won't exhibit Dorian Gray's picture. I want the real reason."
"I told you the reason."
"No, you did not. You said it was because there was too much of yourself in it. Now that is childish."
"Harry,"
said Basil Hallward, looking him straight in the face,
"every portrait that is painted with feeling is a portrait of the artist, not the sitter. The sitter is merely the accident, the occasion. It is not he who is revealed by the painter. It is rather the painter who, on colored canvas, reveals himself. The reason I will not exhibit this picture is that I am afraid that I have shown in it the secret of my own soul."
Lord Henry laughed.
"And what is that?"
he asked.
"I will tell you,"
said Hallward, but an expression of perplexity came over his face.
"I'm all expectation, Basil," continued
his companion, glancing at him.
"Oh, there is really very little to tell, Harry,"
answered the painter.
"And I am afraid you will hardly understand it. Perhaps you will hardly believe it."
Lord Henry smiled, and, leaning down, plucked a pink-petalled daisy from the grass and examined it.
"I'm quite sure I shall understand it."
Blue thread, a long, thin dragon-fly floated past on its brown gauze wings. Lord Henry felt as if he could hear Basil Hallward's heart beating, and wondered what was coming.
"The story is simply this,"
said the painter after some time.
2 months ago I went to a crush at Lady Brandon's. You know we poor artists have to show ourselves in society from time to time, just to remind the public that we are not savages. With an evening coat, well, after I had been in the room about 10 minutes, talking to overdressed dowagers and tedious academicians, I suddenly became conscious that someone was looking at me. I turned halfway around and saw Dorian Gray for the first time. When our eyes met, I felt that I was growing pale. A curious sensation of terror came over me. I knew that I had come face to face with someone whose mere personality was so fascinating that if I allowed it to do so, it would absorb my whole nature, my whole soul, my very art itself. I did not want any external influence in my life. You know yourself, Harry, how independent I am by nature. I have always been my own master, or had at least always been so, till I met Dorian Gray. Then, but I don't know how to explain it to you, something seemed to tell me that I was on the verge of a terrible crisis in my life. I had a strange feeling that fate had in store for me exquisite joys and exquisite sorrows. I grew afraid and turned to quit the room. It was not conscience that made me do so, it was sort of a cowardice. I take no credit to myself for trying to escape.
Conscience and cowardice are really the same things, Basil. Conscience is the trade name of the firm, that is all.
I don't believe that, Harry, and I don't believe you do either. However, whatever was my motive, and it may have been pride, for I used to be very proud, I certainly struggled to the door. There, of course, I stumbled against Lady Brandon. "You are not going to run away so soon, Mr. Hallward," she screamed out. You know her curiously shrill voice.
"Yes, she is a peacock in everything but beauty,"
said Lord Henry, pulling the daisy to bits with his long, nervous fingers.
I could not get rid of her. She brought me up to royalties and people with stars and garters and elderly ladies with gigantic tiaras and parrot noses. She spoke of me as her dearest friend. I had only met her once before, but she took it into her head to lionize me. I believe some picture of mine had made a great success at the time, at least had been chattered about in the penny newspapers, which is the 19th century standard of immortality. Suddenly I found myself face to face with the young man whose personality had so strangely stirred me. We were quite close, almost touching. Our eyes met again. It was reckless of me, but I asked Lady Brandon to introduce me to him. Perhaps it was not so reckless after all. It was simply inevitable. We would have spoken to each other without any introduction. I am sure of that. Dorian told me so afterwards. He too felt we were destined to know each other.
Tragic whisper, which must have been perfectly— My dear fellow, she tried to found a salon and only succeeded in opening a restaurant. How could I admire her? But tell me, what did she say about Mr. Dorian Gray?
Oh, something like, "Charming boy, poor dear mother and I absolutely inseparable. Quite forget what he does, afraid he doesn't do anything. Oh, yes, plays the piano, or is it the violin, dear Mr. Gray?" Neither of us could help laughing, and we became friends at once.
Laughter is not at all a bad beginning for a friendship, and it is far the best ending for one,
said the young lord, plucking another daisy. Hallward shook his head.
You don't understand what friendship is, Harry,
he murmured.
Or what enmity is, for that matter. You like everyone, that is to say, you are indifferent to everyone.
How horribly unjust of you,
cried Lord Henry, tilting his hat back and looking up at the little clouds that, like ravelled skeins of glossy white silk, were drifting across the hollowed turquoise of the summer sky.
Yes, horribly unjust of you. I make a great difference between people. I choose my friends for their good looks, my acquaintances for their good characters, and my enemies for their good intellects. A man cannot be too careful in the choice of his enemies. I have not got one who is a fool. They are all men of some intellectual power, and consequently they all appreciate me. Is that very vain of me? Oh, I think it is rather vain.
I should think it was, Harry, but according to your category I must merely be an acquaintance.
My dear old Basil, you are much more than an acquaintance.
And much less than a friend, a sort of brother, I suppose?
Oh, brothers! I don't care for brothers. My elder brother won't die, and my younger brothers seem never to do anything else.
Harry!
Exclaimed Hallward, frowning.
My dear fellow, I'm not quite serious, but I can't help detesting my relations. I suppose it comes from the fact that none of us can stand other people having the same faults as ourselves. I quite sympathize with the rage of the English democracy against what they call the vices of the upper orders. How extraordinary! I thought you would never care for anything but your art.
He is all my art to me now,
said the painter gravely.
I sometimes think, Harry, that there are only two eras of any importance in the world's history. The first is the appearance of a new medium for art, and the second is the appearance of a new personality for art also. What the invention of oil painting was to the Venetians, the face of Antonius was to the late Greek sculpture, and the face of Dorian Gray will some day be to me. It is not merely that I paint from him, draw from him, sketch from him. Of course I have done all that, but he is much more to me than a model, or a sitter. I won't tell you that I am dissatisfied with what I have done of him, or that his beauty is such that art cannot express it. There is nothing that art cannot express, and I know that the work I have done since I met Dorian Gray is good work, is the best work of my life. But in some curious way, I wonder will you understand me, his personality has suggested to me an entirely new manner in art, an entirely new mode of style. I see things differently.
But I should be going. I have to meet Charles down at the bar.
If he goes, I'll go too. You never say anything when you're painting, and I get so bored.
Oh, it's true. I don't talk or listen when I paint. Please stay, Henry.
What about Charles?
I don't think that will be a problem. Dorian, if you try not to move too much. And ignore everything Henry says. He's a terrible influence.
Are you really a bad influence?
All influence is bad, from a scientific perspective.
Why?
Because once influence, a person does not behave naturally. His virtues are fake. His sins, if there are such things, are borrowed. He becomes nothing more than an echo. The purpose of life is to grow, to fully realize your own potential. These days people are afraid. Sure, they're kind, donating to the poor and treating the sick. But it's their own souls that are truly sick and naked. There's no more courage left in our race. Perhaps we never had it. The terror of society is the basis of morals. The fear of God, the secret of religion. These are the laws that govern us.
Turn your head a little to the right, Dorian.
And yet, if a man were to live life completely, to give form to every dream, I believe the world would gain such an impulse of joy that we would forget about the days of the Dark Ages, and instead return to ancient Greek philosophy. When his body speaks of passion, he would listen. Denying these natural pleasures would harm the body. Our lives are punished for our refusals. The only way to get rid of a temptation is to yield to it. Resist. And decay. It has been said that the great events of the world take place in the mind. It is also in the mind where the great sins of the world take place. You, Dorian, with your rose-red youth, rose-white boyhood, you've had passions that make you feel scared, thoughts that terrified you, dreams that have made you blush with shame.
Stop! You're confusing me. Don't talk. Just let me think. Try not to think. I need to take a walk.
Oh, sure. Sorry, I wasn't thinking. I didn't hear a single word Henry was saying. You did make an interesting expression on your face. I suppose it was compliments?
No. Which is probably why I don't believe a thing he said.
You know you believe it. I think I'll go join Dorian in the garden.
How wise of you.
Nothing can cure the soul but the senses, just as nothing can cure the senses but the soul. You know more than you think you know, and you know less than you want to know. You look upset.
Don't care how I look.
You should,
Why?
because you're young, and youth is the only thing worth having.
I don't agree.
You don't believe me now, but someday you will. You charm everyone you meet, but it won't always be like that. You have beauty. Beauty is better than genius. Beauty can't be challenged. You smile. When it's gone, you won't. You only have a few more years left to live. After that, the magic of the world fades. Time is jealous of you, and it will take what it has given.